Though the aircraft we will talk about today was not built in very high numbers, nor was it astoundingly fast or extremely maneuverable. Actually, it was quite the opposite, but still it's one of the most well-known World War II planes, as its design and weaponry makes it unique. This was the Henschel Hs 129 ground attack aircraft, the Panzerknacker or tank buster. So let's see the history of this aircraft today. The story of this aircraft started during the Spanish Civil War, which was used by several countries to test new weapons and tactics. Many new Soviet, Italian and German vehicles appeared in Spain to be tested in combat, and they affected the upcoming developments in the years before World War II. One of the experiences the German Luftwaffe gathered in this war was the importance of dedicated ground attack aircraft. They found that their current planes used for close air support were unsatisfactory for the task to attack moving and maneuvering targets, such as tanks, armored vehicles, or troops. Though the new dive bombers, like the Ju-87 Stuka, were very accurate against fixed targets, they were not effective against moving vehicles and troops. And the fighter aircraft of the time pushed into the ground attack role, like the Hg-51 or Hs-123 biplanes, were too vulnerable and too lightly armed for these type of missions. So in 1937, the RLM issued new specifications for a new type of dedicated ground attack aircraft. They asked for the new designs to be well armored around the cockpit and engines, the cockpit to be positioned as close to the nose as possible to maximize visibility for the pilot, feature a heavy armament of 20mm cannons, and most importantly they suggested the designs should use engines that are not already assigned to existing frontline aircraft, to avoid interfering with production. Henschel, Focke-Wulf and Hamburger Flugzeugbau, a subsidiary of Blohm & Voss, entered designs in the competition. The Hamburger proposal was a modified version of their asymmetrical reconnaissance plane, the BV-141. Henschel entered their P-46 design, using two Argus 410 engines and featuring heavy armor plating, an armored tub around the cockpit protecting the pilot from below, and a heavily armored canopy made from thick armored glass. Focke-Wulf also proposed a modified variant of their FW-189 reconnaissance plane, keeping the basic design and engines, but instead of the stepless glazed crew compartment, the new design featured a heavily armored one-man cockpit and 20mm cannons. If you're interested in the history of the BV-141 or the FW-189, I have already made videos about those types, check them out. The Hamburger design was eliminated early from the competition, as it was deemed too unconventional, so the only two remaining contestants were the Focke-Wulf and the Henschel planes. After reviewing the plans, the early assessment was that they both just barely met the specifications, but their performance seemed very similar, so both designs were accepted for further evaluation, and the RLM ordered 3 prototypes from each. The designs received the designations FW-189S and Hs-129. The Focke-Wulf plane was finished first in early 1939, as they took their V1 prototype of the original reconnaissance aircraft and modified it to the new role. But the base aircraft was already underpowered, and the new variant suffered even more from the added weight of armor plating and armament, making the plane's flight characteristics even worse. Henschel finished the first Hs-129 V1 soon after in May 1939, and the plane made its maiden flight in the same month. During the comparison flights, both aircraft found to be underpowered, showed poor handling, and they were criticized for their poor visibility as well. The assessment of the test pilots seemed to be true on both aircraft, as the Hs-129 V2 variant crashed in January 1940 during a dive test, while the Focke-Wulf design had a similar accident in November. Though none of the two showed very good handling and both suffered from various problems, in the end the RLM chose the Henschel design, as it was slightly smaller than its rival, showed a bit better performance, and its cost was only 2/3 of the Focke-Wulf designs. The FW-189S was put on low priority and kept as a backup in case something goes horribly wrong with the Hs-129 project. Already, while the evaluation flights were underway, a contract was assigned to Henschel for 12 Hs-129A0 pre-production aircraft. which was quickly followed by a small order for the slightly improved A1 version, which was the proposed production variant. These pre-production variants were sent to service trials in late 1940, but the conclusion after the flights was very unfavorable. The pilots and ground crews both disliked the type, and it earned the nickname the Flying Coffin. As the planes were still underpowered, the visibility for the pilot still restricted, and the controls were still heavy. And if the plane went into a dive steeper than 30 degrees, the force to move the control surfaces became so excessive, it was simply out of human physical capabilities. As a result of the negative reports, the Luftwaffe refused to accept the A1 variant to service. Following these experiences, Henschel actually proposed a completely new design based on the Hs 129, but this was rejected, as introducing a new design would have caused long delays in deliveries. So a decision was made to create a modified version of the original design, using the more powerful 700 horsepower French Nomron radial engines. These engines were first tested on the original WWII prototype between March and May 1941, and the pilots reported improved performance compared to earlier variants. 16 of the already finished A1 variants were retrofitted with the new stronger engines, and they were redesignated as Hs 129B0 in late 1940, and the test flight showed the new variant had much better flight characteristics than its predecessor. But there were still complaints about the heavy controls and bad visibility. This led to the introduction of a new redesigned cockpit and canopy to improve visibility and comfort for the pilots. The early small V-shaped windscreen was also changed to a single curved one. Nonetheless, the space in the cockpit was still so limited that some instruments were placed outside on the engine nacelles. After the successful trials, the B1 variant of the aircraft was finally ordered into production in December 1941, and deliveries to the unit started in early 1942. The V1 to V3 variants were the original prototypes, using the Argus 410 engines, and featuring two 7.92mm machine guns and two 20mm Oerlikon MGFF cannons. The following A0 and A1 versions were the pre-production models, featuring small improvements, and the original Oerlikon cannons were changed to MG151/20 types. The B0 versions were the original A1 variants converted to the more powerful Nomron engines, and featured a redesigned nose section and a new cockpit and canopy, providing better visibility for the pilots. The B1 was the first production variant, featuring all the improvements introduced on the earlier version. On these planes, the gun tubes changed from the closed design to open ones. Though in theory, the 20mm cannon could penetrate 43mm of armor, but in reality, during combat conditions, they proved to be too weak to deal with enemy tanks. So different field modifications were introduced for the type. The first one announced for the B1 variant was the 30mm Mk101 cannon, mounted under the fuselage in a gun pod. There was also an anti-personnel modification featuring four 7.92mm machine guns mounted in a similar manner. The B2 variant was introduced after the B1 models entered service on the Eastern Front, and numerous problems were found with the engines. They suffered from overheating and seizures caused by dust and sand. As a result, usually more than half of the aircraft in every unit were grounded for repairs. So soon, improvements were introduced on the engine cowlings, featuring shorter exhaust pipes, a modified fuel system, and new rectangular air intakes, incorporating dust filters. This variant also introduced again heavier armament, as the Soviet forces started to use their new tanks in bigger numbers, and these were able to withstand the shells of the Mk101 30mm cannon. Actually, they caused problems even for the ground-based 50mm anti-tank guns. Several sub-variants of the plane appeared with different armament. The Hs 129B2/R1 had its 7.92mm machine guns replaced with 13mm ones. The B2/R2 carried the 30mm Mk103 cannon, which was an increased muzzle velocity variant of the Mk101 with higher armor penetration. and the B2/R3 featured the 37mm BK-37 anti-tank gun. To save weight on this variant, the two original machine guns were removed. There were experiments with the 50mm BK-5 cannon as well, but those were eventually cancelled. But an experimental version, the B2/R4 was built, with the 75mm PEC-40 gun in a pod under the fuselage, as this weapon was already tested on the Junkers Ju-88 bombers, so it was logical to adopt this gun for the Henschel plane as well. Tests with the new gun started in early 1944, and it was found the gun pod didn't affect the plane's flight characteristics too much, so it was put into production as Hs 129 B3 model. Though the Hs 129 enjoyed success against the Soviet tanks with the 30 and 37mm cannons, but the B3 variant took this even further, featuring the 75mm BK-75 cannon. This weapon had a muzzle velocity of 932 meters a second, and could penetrate 130mm of armor from 1000 meters. It featured an autoloader with 16 shells and had a fire rate of about 40 rounds a minute, allowing the pilot to land several shots on the target in one pass. To fit the heavy weapon on the aircraft, the two 20mm cannons were removed to save weight. The C and D variants were both planned to improve the plane's performance by using different engines. 850 horsepower Italian Isotta Fraschini engines on the C variant, and 1100 horsepower Yumo 211 engines on the D variant, but neither of them were built in the end. The Hs 129 was 9.75 meters long, with a wingspan of 14.2 meters. It had an empty weight of 4,020 kilograms and a maximum takeoff weight of 5,250 kilograms. The plane was powered by two Nomron 14-cylinder radial air-cooled engines, developing 700 horsepower each. With these engines, it could reach a top speed of 407 km an hour and a cruise speed of 315 km an hour. The plane had a range of 690 km and a service ceiling of 9,000 meters. The main armament consisted of two 20mm cannons and two 7.92mm machine guns mounted in the nose, and optionally one 30 or 37mm cannon in a gun pod under the fuselage. As a secondary armament, the plane could carry 4 50-kilogram bombs on outside racks. The Hs 129 was continuously tested until early 1942, when finally the RLM decided they will send the type to combat. The first operational unit was formed in January, receiving the B1 variants of the aircraft, and they were deployed to the Eastern Front in May. They started to fly missions against Soviet columns and vehicles, first using their original machine guns and cannons, and later, when the 30mm Mk101 modifications arrived, those became the standard anti-tank weapons on the type. Despite the engine troubles and losses to Soviet anti-aircraft fire, the new ground attack aircraft made a good impression on the Eastern Front. By late 1942, the British victories in North Africa sent the Axis forces to a full retreat, and the Luftwaffe decided to deploy the Hs 129 in the theater. They flew their first missions in November against the British forces, and they proved to be lethal with their 30mm cannons, which were very effective against the British tanks and armored cars. But despite using the upgraded B2 variants featuring better air filters, those proved to be inadequate against the sand and intense heat. The planes were grounded one after another due to problems and lack of spare parts. Many of them were lost to anti-aircraft fire and to fighters as well, as the Allied air superiority grew stronger in the area. At the end of the North African campaign, the personnel were evacuated to Sicily, and the Allies captured many of these planes. The type continued to serve on the Eastern Front, where their role became even more important after the Soviet army started to advance. They were involved in every major operations, and were used in numbers during the Battle of Kursk, where by the end of the battle they lost 48 of the 60 participating aircraft. During 1943 and 1944, these attack planes were used as a rapid reaction force, to be deployed wherever the ground forces needed help against the Soviet armor. By mid-1944, the Hs-129 pilots claimed more than 1,500 Soviet tanks and armored vehicles. But these victories came at a price, and their own losses were high as well. As the Axis forces were pushed back, the type was used at every part of the Eastern Front, in Poland, Hungary, and Romania. By late 1944, the RLM stopped the Hs-129 production, and newer types like the WWII fighters started to take over the ground attack role. Still, the remaining planes stayed in service and fought until the end of the war. Though this aircraft was not as fast or maneuverable as other planes in World War II, with its heavy armament it was very effective against tanks, armored cars, and other vehicles. Its low numbers, however, meant that despite its success, it didn't have a big effect on the outcome of the war. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.